You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple. Subscribe. We've reached 10,000 corrupted souls. The void has grown powerful, but our hunger is endless. Our next conquest, 100,000 subscribers, before 2027 descends upon us. Will you join our ever-growing legion, or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. The candles flickered against ancient stone walls as Dr. Adrian Petran held the photograph with trembling hands. In the dimly lit interview room at the University of Cluj-Napoca, his face appeared gaunt, aged beyond his 43 years. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something that shouldn't be remembered. "Everyone thinks I'm here to talk about medieval manuscripts," he said, placing the photograph on the table between us. "They're wrong. I'm here because what happened in those mountains 6 months ago is going to happen again. Not in my lifetime, but it will happen. And someone needs to know the truth before I lose the ability to tell it." The photograph showed a Byzantine-style painting, a fresco from somewhere deep in the Carpathian wilderness, where you'd expect saints and angels, martyrs and prophets. There was instead a towering figure that seemed to bend wrong, its limbs connected at angles that made my eyes water just looking at the image, as if the photograph itself resisted being perceived clearly. "What am I looking at?" I asked. Adrian's laugh was bitter, hollow. That's the question that ruins everything. Once you start asking what it is, you can't stop. The curiosity becomes an obsession. And once you see it clearly... He trailed off, staring at something past my shoulder. For a moment, genuine terror crossed his face. The kind of fear you see in people who've survived things that shouldn't exist. Then he blinked, refocused, forced himself back to the present. "I'm getting ahead of myself. This started 6 months ago in Bukovina, in the heart of the painted monastery region." He pulled out a map, spreading it across the table. His fingers, I noticed, had a slight tremor. "You know about the famous monasteries, Voronet with its impossible blue, Moldovita with its siege frescoes, Susavita with its ladder of virtues, UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Tourists photograph them every day, never knowing what they're really looking at. But there was always a seventh monastery, one that didn't appear in the guidebooks, one that Stephen the Great built, in a place no road could reach. 6 months earlier, Adrian's expedition vehicle wound through virgin Carpathian forest, on a logging road that had been abandoned for decades. Beside him sat Dr. Elena Radulescu, his research partner of 7 years, her laptop full of satellite imagery and historical documents. In the back seat, Father Nicolae from Putnam Monastery worked his prayer rope with anxious fingers, the wooden beads clicking in rhythm with the vehicle's movement over rough terrain. The priest had been reluctant to guide them. It had taken 3 weeks of persuasion, academic credentials, and finally a personal appeal from the university's rector before he'd agreed. Even then, he'd made them sign documents, absolving him of responsibility for whatever they found. "We should turn back," Father Nicolae said for the 3rd time that hour, his voice tight with tension that went beyond normal caution. Elena glanced at Adrian, then turned to face the priest. "Father, if this monastery exists, it's one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in Romanian history. Stephen the Great's lost 7th monastery. The academic community has speculated about it for decades." "Let them speculate," the priest muttered. "Some things exist in speculation for good reason." "What does that mean?" Adrian asked, navigating around a fallen tree that blocked half the road. Father Nicolae was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, older somehow, weighted with knowledge he didn't want to possess. Every priest in Bukovina knows about the Monastery of Seven Seals. We don't talk about it with outsiders, but we know. The knowledge gets passed down when we're ordained. A warning more than a history lesson. Stephen the Great built 48 churches and monasteries during his reign. Everyone celebrates that, the great defender of Christianity, building houses of God after each victory. But they don't ask the right questions. What questions? Elena prompted. Why 48? Why that specific number? Why were 7 of those monasteries built in places almost impossible to reach, fortified not like churches but like prisons? Why were they never painted on the outside like the others? And why, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, why were the doors of one monastery sealed from the inside, with the monks still living within? The forest opened into a clearing, and there it stood. The Monastery of Seven Seals rose from the mountain like a natural outcropping of rock, its walls the colour of old blood in the afternoon light. Dark stone, narrow windows set high in walls that had to be 3 feet thick. Architecture that spoke of containment rather than contemplation. Where the famous painted monasteries welcomed pilgrims with vibrant frescoes and graceful proportions, this structure seemed designed to warn people away. Elena was already out the vehicle, camera in hand, professional excitement overriding caution. Adrian, look at the stonework. This is definitely Stephen the Great's period, late 15th century construction techniques. But the design is completely different from his other monasteries. This is fortress architecture. Adrian joined her, studying the entrance. The wooden gates had long since rotted away, leaving only the stone archway. But what made him stop, made his academic curiosity falter for just a moment, were the inscriptions. They covered every surface of the archway, layered over each other in different scripts, different languages, different time periods. These aren't just decorative, he said, running his fingers over the carved stone. The oldest inscriptions are in Old Church Slavonic, probably contemporary with the monastery's construction. But there are additions in Latin, Romanian, even some in Greek, all saying essentially the same thing. Which is? Elena asked, already photographing every angle. Adrian translated slowly, his academic Romanian inflected with the archaic grammar. Let no hand break the seal, let no eye see the watcher, let no soul forget the price of 1347. Here lies the vigil that must not end. Here stands the door that must not open. Turn back and live in blessed ignorance. 1347, Eleanor repeated. That's when the Black Death reached this region. Reached everywhere, Adrian corrected. It killed 1/3 of Europe's population, maybe more. But what does a plague have to do with sealing a monastery? Father Nicolai had approached but wouldn't cross the threshold. He stood at the edge of the archway as if an invisible barrier prevented him from entering. Because it wasn't just a plague, Dr. Petran. Or rather, the plague was only part of what happened. The histories tell you about Yersinia pestis, about rats and fleas, about buboes and mass graves. They don't tell you about what people saw before they died, what they reported in the weeks before the first cases appeared. What did they see? Adrian asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted the answer. The priest pulled out a small, leather-bound journal from his coat. This was written by a monk named Grigory, who served at Voronezh Monastery in 1347. It's not part of the official archives. It's kept separate, in a locked box, passed from abbot to abbot. I wasn't supposed to bring it, but... He opened to a marked page and read aloud. March the 10th, year of our Lord, 1347. Brother Vasile came to me this morning with disturbing news from the villages. People are experiencing shared dreams, visions of a tall figure standing in doorways, watching them with patient interest. At first, I dismissed this as peasant superstition, the kind of folklore that spreads during uncertain times. But then, Brother Ioan reported the same dream. then Sister Theodora from the women's monastery, then a merchant from Constantinople who had never set foot in our region before. All describing the same figure, all seeing it in the same places, thresholds, boundaries, the spaces between rooms. I've ordered increased prayers and fasting. Something is coming. I can feel it in the air, like the pressure before a great storm. Father Nicolai turned the page. April the 2nd. The children have begun drawing pictures, all the same image, a tall form, angular and wrong, standing in doorways. The local priest burned the drawings, fearing demonic influence. But more appear. The children say the figure visits them at night, standing at their bedroom doors, watching but never entering. They say it doesn't move like living things move. It unfolds itself through space, as if occupying multiple positions simultaneously. I've sent word to the other monasteries asking if they experience similar phenomena. May the 20th, responses have arrived from across Moldavia, from Wallachia, even from as far as Buda and Constantinople. All report the same visions. All describe the same figure. The Brotherhood of Seven Seals has convened an emergency council. They say this is the manifestation they were founded to watch for. They say the cycle has returned, 777 years since the last occurrence. They speak of a watcher, of thresholds between dimensions, of cosmic alignments that thin the barriers between what is and what should not be. I confess I do not fully understand their theology, but their fear is genuine. These are learned men, scholars of ancient texts, and they are terrified. Adrian felt cold despite the warm afternoon. The Brotherhood of Seven Seals. That's the second time you've mentioned them. Who were they? Father Nicolai closed the journal carefully. That's what you're going to find out in there, Dr. Petran. That's why I finally agreed to bring you here. Because the Brotherhood left something behind. A record of what they knew, what they fought against, and what they ultimately sacrificed themselves to contain. If you're determined to open this place, you should at least understand what you're opening. They stepped through the archway into shadow. The interior was surprisingly well preserved. No roof collapse, no major water damage, as if the structure had been hermetically sealed. Their flashlights cut through darkness that seemed to resist illumination, the beams swallowed by something more than mere absence of light. The entrance hall led directly into the main chapel, and when their lights hit the walls, all three of them stopped breathing. Frescoes covered every surface from floor to ceiling, but these weren't the glorious religious scenes that made the painted monasteries famous. These were documentary in nature, precise, detailed, chronological, a visual history of something terrible. The first panel showed a city Adrian recognized from historical illustrations. Kaffa, the Genoese trading post in Crimea. The date painted in the corner read October 1347. The detail was extraordinary. You could see individual faces in the crowds, the rigging on ships in the harbour, the architecture of the city walls, and in the background, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, stood a tall figure. It was painted in a way that hurt to look at directly, as if the artist had struggled to represent something their eyes couldn't quite process. The next panel, Constantinople, December 1347. The great city in all its Byzantine glory, its walls and domes and marketplaces rendered with loving precision. And there, in a doorway near the imperial palace, the figure stood watching. Sicily, January 1348. Messina Harbour, Genoese ships arriving from the east. The figure at the dock. Florence, March 1348. The figure in the Piazza della Signoria. Paris, June 1348. The figure on the Ile de la Cité. London, September 1348. The figure at London Bridge. Panel after panel, city after city. A meticulous documentation of the Black Deaths spread across Europe. But the plague itself was secondary to the painting's true subject. In every scene, the figure appeared at thresholds, City gates, doorways, bridges, the boundaries between the living quarters and the areas being abandoned to disease. "This is contemporary work," Adrian said, his voice hushed with academic awe despite his growing unease. 14th century materials and techniques, egg tempera on wet plaster, typical of Byzantine fresco tradition. But the subject matter, someone was tracking this thing in real time, documenting its appearances as the plague spread. Elena had moved to another wall, where a series of smaller panels showed something different. These depicted not cities, but people, individuals in various stages of encountering the figure. The progression was disturbing. In the first image, a man glimpsed the figure in his peripheral vision, his expression curious. In the second, he turned to look directly at it, his face beginning to show horror. In the third, he was screaming, his hands clutching his head. In the fourth and final panel, he stood motionless, staring at nothing, his eyes empty of everything that made them human. Beneath this sequence, painted in careful Slavonic script, Brother Petru, who looked upon the watcher directly. "May God have mercy on his soul, which departed without his body dying." "What does that mean?" Elena whispered. "His soul departed without his body dying?" Father Nikolai had moved to stand before a large central fresco that dominated the chapel's apse. "Look at this one. This is what happened here, in this monastery." The fresco showed 15 monks sealed within stone walls, their faces gaunt with starvation, their bodies wasted, but they were positioned deliberately, ritualistically, forming a circle, their hands joined, their mouths open in what might have been prayer, or might have been screaming. And in the centre of their circle, barely suggested by the artist, was the tall figure, not watching them but somehow bound by them, contained by their willing sacrifice. The inscription beneath read, June 14th, 1347. "The last brothers of the Seven Seals make their final choice. May their deaths seal what their lives could not bind. May their sacrifice be remembered when the cycle returns. May those who come after be wiser than we were." "They starved themselves to death," Adrian said slowly, the horror of it settling into his bones. "They sealed themselves in here and chose to die." "Not just die," Father Nikolai corrected. "Sacrifice themselves. There's a difference. They believed their deaths, performed willingly in this place at this time, would create some kind of spiritual barrier, a seal against whatever they'd been watching for." Elena had found another section of frescoes, these showing what appeared to be historical documentation. "Adrian, look at this. It's a timeline." The panels showed a series of dates, each illustrated with scenes of catastrophe. 570 AD, the Justinian plague. Constantinople in flames. Bodies piling in the streets. The great city reduced to a fraction of its population. And in every scene, the figure watching from thresholds. Beneath it, the first documented manifestation. 25 million souls passed the threshold in 3 years. The Brotherhood was founded in this year to watch for the next cycle. Then a gap, the wall space painted with stars and celestial symbols, suggesting the passage of time. 1347 AD. The Black Death, Europe in agony, a third of the continent dying. The figure present in every major city, every town, every village touched by plague. Beneath it, the second manifestation, 50 million souls. The Brotherhood attempted the binding ritual but failed. This monastery contains their final sacrifice. Then more stars, more symbols of time passing, leading to a final panel that made Adrian's blood run cold. 2124 AD. A city he recognized as modern Bucharest, but changed. Taller buildings, different architecture, the future imagined by a medieval artist, and the figure standing in Victory Square, surrounded by crowds of people who stared at it with expressions of absolute terror. Beneath it, the third manifestation. God grant that those who live in these times are wiser than we were, God grant they find a better way than our deaths purchased. That's impossible, Soren said, though his voice lacked conviction. This fresco is medieval. How could it predict the future? Maybe they weren't predicting, Elena said quietly. Maybe they were calculating. Look, 777 years between 570 and 1347, and 777 years between 1347 and 2124. They identified a pattern, a cycle. Adrian was studying the astronomical symbols painted between the dates. They're showing celestial alignments, specific configurations of stars and planets. They believed something about the cosmic arrangement every 777 years allowed this entity to manifest in human awareness. Behind the altar, partially hidden by shadows, they found a heavy iron door. 7 locks secured it, each one engraved with elaborate prayers in Old Church Slavonic. The metal had corroded over the centuries, green with verdigris, but the locks held firm. Father Nikolai approached cautiously, reading the inscriptions aloud, "By the blood of Christ who conquered death, by the power of the saints who guard the threshold, by the sacrifice of the Brotherhood who gave their lives to this seal, by the mercy of God who grants us time to prepare, by the wisdom of those who know what must not be known, by the courage of those who watch what must not be seen, by the 7 seals, 7 gates, 7 watchers, let this binding hold until the stars themselves forget their numbers." 7 locks, Elena observed. 7 seals, 7 monasteries. The symbolism is consistent. Adrian was already examining the mechanisms with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years studying medieval engineering. These are remarkably sophisticated for 14th century work. The locking mechanism isn't just physical. See how the prayer inscriptions are integrated into the design. It's as if breaking the locks would require disrupting the prayers themselves. Symbolic and functional merged into one. "We shouldn't open this," Father Nikolai said, but it wasn't a plea anymore. It was a statement of fact, spoken by a man who knew he wouldn't be heeded, but needed to say it anyway. Whatever they sealed in there, they did so for a reason. Elena looked at Adrian. In 7 years of working together, they developed a kind of silent communication, a shared understanding born from countless research projects, late nights in archives, the peculiar intimacy of academic partnership. In that moment, the decision passed between them without words. They had come too far, found too much to turn back now. The academic drive to know, to understand, to reveal secrets lost to history. It was a compulsion stronger than caution. It's what made them good historians. It's what would destroy everything. "We'll document everything," Adrian said, pulling out his camera. "Photograph the seals in their original state. Record every detail before we disturb anything. This needs to be done properly, methodically." Father Nikolai didn't argue further. He simply stepped back, pulled out his prayer rope and began to pray in a whisper. Old prayers. Protective prayers. Prayers for forgiveness for what was about to happen. The locks opened, more easily than they should have, given their age and the corrosion. Almost, Adrian thought with a chill. He tried to dismiss his imagination, as if something had been waiting for this moment. As if the locks had held not because they were strong, but because no one had tried to open them in 677 years. The vault door swung inward, with a groan of ancient hinges, and air rushed out, stale, dry, carrying the scent of old parchment and something else, something like incense that had been burning for centuries, or the peculiar smell of very old places where time itself seems to have settled into the stones. Inside, the vault was larger than the exterior suggested, the walls lined with wooden shelves that had somehow survived the centuries, and on those shelves, stacked with obsessive care, were manuscripts. Hundreds of them, all bound in identical leather covers, all written in the same script. Elena lifted the nearest one with gloved hands. the kind of archival gloves they brought specifically for handling medieval documents. The leather binding cracked slightly as she opened it, but the vellum pages inside were remarkably well preserved. "I am Brother Constantine," she read aloud, "born in the year 1289, initiated into the Brotherhood of Seven Seals in the year 1307, appointed scribe in the year 1320, and now, in this year of our Lord, 1347, I write what may be the final chronicle of our order. If you are reading this, then you have opened the vault we sealed with our deaths. If you have opened it, then the cosmic cycle has turned further than we predicted, or humanity has grown foolish enough to ignore our warnings. May God have mercy on us all, for you have rung the bell, and what hears bells will come." Adrian felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Keep reading." Elena turned the pages carefully. "Our order was founded in the year 570, during the great dying that consumed the empire of Justinian. The plague that ravaged Constantinople and spread across the known world killed more than a quarter of humanity. But the plague was not the true catastrophe. The plague was a symptom of something far more terrible. The manifestation of what we call Străjerul Morții, the Watcher of Death, the thing that exists in the space between living and dying, and which every 777 years becomes visible to human consciousness. I will attempt to explain what our order has learned across these centuries, though I know my words will seem like madness to those who have not witnessed what we have witnessed. There exists a dimension, or perhaps a state of being, that is neither life nor death, but the threshold between them. Every human soul passes through this threshold in the moment of dying. For most, the passage is instantaneous, unconscious, a transition too swift to be perceived. But the threshold itself is real. It is a place, or perhaps a non-place, where consciousness briefly exists in a state of dissolution, transforming from one form to another. And in that threshold something dwells. We call it the Watcher, though it has been given many names across many cultures. It is not a demon, not an angel, not a spirit in any sense we understand. It is a function, a cosmic mechanism, the thing that maintains the boundary between states of being, that ensures the transformation from life to death proceeds as it must. Without it, nothing would end. Matter and energy would never change state. The universe would freeze in an eternal present. It is, in a sense, as necessary as gravity or time. But it should not be perceived by the living. Human consciousness is not structured to comprehend something that exists outside the temporal flow. When the Watcher becomes visible to those still alive, when people become aware of the threshold while still on the living side of it, the knowledge is catastrophic. The mind cannot process what it represents. To see the Watcher is to see every possible moment of death simultaneously. Your own, everyone you know, everyone who has ever lived, or ever will live. It is to comprehend mortality, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. To know with absolute certainty that the boundary exists, and that you will cross it, and to be unable to stop knowing it. Every 777 years, due to celestial alignments, we have documented but never fully understood. The barrier between dimensions thins. The threshold becomes visible to human awareness. The Watcher manifests not in our world. It cannot cross over fully, but at the edge of our perception. People begin to see it in doorways, in corners, in the spaces between waking and sleeping. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. The awareness spreads like contagion, and with that awareness comes madness, despair, the complete collapse of the human psyche's ability to function while bearing the weight of that knowledge. In 570, when the Watcher last manifested, the result was the Justinian plague. Not because the Watcher brought disease. It is not an agent of death in that sense, but because humanity's collective awareness of the threshold created conditions where mass death became inevitable. People lost the will to live. They saw the boundary and could not stop seeing it. Some went mad and killed themselves. Others became catatonic, their consciousness already halfway across the threshold. Society collapsed not from plague alone, but from the psychological weight of knowing, truly knowing, that death was not an abstraction, but a real place where a real thing waited, with patient interest. Our order was founded by survivors of that manifestation, those few who learned to keep the Watcher in peripheral awareness, to acknowledge its presence without looking directly upon it. We dedicated ourselves to watching for the next cycle, to preparing humanity for the next manifestation, to finding a way to prevent the catastrophic awareness from spreading. For 777 years, we have maintained our vigil. We built 7 monasteries at sites where the dimensional barrier is thinnest, places where the threshold touches our world most closely. We studied the Watcher's nature. We developed rituals to strengthen the barrier, prayers and meditations designed to maintain the separation between dimensions. We documented everything, hoping that knowledge accumulated across centuries would provide a solution. But we have failed. The Watcher manifests now, in this year 1347, and we are not ready. The plague arrives from the east, carried by merchants and soldiers, and in its wake, the psychological collapse spreads. People report seeing the Watcher in their homes, in their streets, in every doorway and corner. The awareness grows like wildfire, and those who look upon it directly, those who turn to face it fully, they shatter. Their minds cannot hold the weight of what they perceive. We attempted the great binding ritual, the culmination of our order's knowledge. It requires 49 monks, 7 at each of the 7 monasteries, all entering a meditative state simultaneously, all positioning their consciousness partially in the threshold dimension. By becoming bridges between worlds, we hope to strengthen the barrier, to seal the Watcher back into its proper place. But the plague killed most of our order before we could complete the ritual. Of the 280 monks who comprised our brotherhood, fewer than 30 remain. The disease spread through our monasteries with terrible efficiency. We lived in close quarters, we tended the sick. We could not isolate ourselves without abandoning our sacred duty. And so we make our final choice. Those of us who remain will seal ourselves in this monastery, the central site where the barrier is thinnest and the Watcher's presence strongest. We will die here together, our deaths not a retreat but a last desperate act of binding. By choosing to die in this place, by positioning our departing souls in the threshold space, by making our sacrifice willing and ritualistic, we hope to create a living seal, or rather, a dying seal. Our souls will hold the boundary closed even as our bodies fail. It is not the solution we sought. It is crude, imperfect, and it will not last forever. But it may buy humanity time. Time to prepare for the next cycle. Time to find a better answer than the one we provide with our deaths. If you are reading this, the seal has been broken, or the next cycle has arrived. I pray it is the latter, that 777 years have passed, and humanity has used that time wisely. I pray you have found a way to face the Watcher's manifestation without the mass death and madness that accompanies it. But if you have broken the seal early, if you have opened this vault before the appointed time, then God have mercy on you. You have called the Watcher's attention. You have weakened the barrier we died to maintain. And it will come, patient and eternal. It will manifest in human awareness once more. And you will learn, as we learned, that some knowledge destroys the mind that holds it, that some truths are too terrible to bear, that the blessed ignorance of the masses is a mercy, not a curse. I write these final words as my brothers prepare the ritual of sealing. We have not eaten in 3 days, entering the fast that will lead to our deaths. We have purified ourselves with prayer and meditation. We have made our peace with God and with our choice. In a few hours, we will seal the doors from within. We will join hands in the circle, We will position our consciousness in the threshold space, and we will die there, holding the boundary closed with the last strength of our departing souls. May those who come after us be wiser. May they find a way to live with the knowledge we could not bear. May humanity evolve beyond the need for our sacrifice. But until that day, remember, do not look upon the Watcher directly. Keep it always in peripheral vision. Do not speak of it except in hushed tones. Do not seek to understand it fully, for understanding is the path to madness. And above all, do not break the seals we have placed. Every lock on this vault, every prayer inscribed in stone, every warning painted on these walls, they are there for a reason. We are the Brotherhood of Seven Seals. We watched for 777 years. We failed in our primary mission, but we do not fail in our final duty. The seal will hold until the next cycle, until 2124, when the stars align again and humanity must face what we faced. May God grant them the wisdom to succeed where we failed. Brother Constantine, last scribe of a failed covenant, writing by candlelight as the sun sets on June 13th, 1347. Tomorrow, we die. Tomorrow the seal is made. Tomorrow the Watcher is bound by our sacrifice. May it hold, may it hold, may it hold. Elena closed the manuscript with shaking hands. The vault was silent except for their breathing and the faint sound of Father Nicole's whispered prayers. "This is insane," Adrian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Medieval mysticism, apocalyptic visions during a pandemic. They were trying to make sense of catastrophe through the lens of their religious worldview." "Then explain the timeline," Elena countered. "Explain how they calculated 2124. Explain the frescoes that show modern Bucharest. Explain the astronomical alignments they documented." Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to retreat into academic rationalism, but he couldn't shake the feeling that had been growing since they entered the monastery. The sense of being observed, of standing at the edge of something vast and patient and utterly indifferent to human concerns. "We need to carbon date these manuscripts," he said, falling back on methodology, on process, on the comfortable rituals of historical verification, verify the ink composition, get paleographic analysis, if these are authentic 14th century documents. "Then we found evidence of an organization that doesn't appear in any historical record," Elena finished. "An order that watched for, what? Interdimensional entities? Cosmic cycles of manifestation? Adrian, this reads like science fiction, not history." Father Nicolai had stopped praying. He stood before them, his face pale in the flashlight beams. "I told you some things exist in speculation for good reason. The Church has known about the Brotherhood for centuries. Not officially. There are no papal bulls, no council declarations. But the knowledge has been passed down through certain channels. Priests who serve in the painted monastery region are told about the Seven Seals. We're taught to watch for signs of disturbance, to report any unusual phenomena, to maintain the spiritual defences that Stephen the Great established when he built his monasteries over the original Brotherhood sites." "You're saying the Church believes this?" Adrian asked incredulously. "The Church is very old, Dr. Petran. It has seen many things that don't fit neatly into theological or scientific categories. Sometimes the wisest course is to maintain what works without fully understanding why it works. The Brotherhood died to create a seal. For 677 years, that seal held. Maybe it was their sacrifice, maybe it was faith, maybe it was something else entirely. Does it matter? It worked. Until we opened the vault," Elena said quietly. "Until you opened the vault," Father Nicolai confirmed. 3 hours ago, you broke 7 locks that had held for 677 years. You disrupted prayers that had been undisturbed for centuries. You opened a door that 15 men died to seal. And now," he gestured helplessly at the manuscripts, the frescoes, the evidence of impossible things recorded in meticulous detail. Now we find out what happens when the seal breaks early. They packed what manuscripts they could carry, sealing each one in protective archival cases. Adrian's hands trembled as he worked, adrenaline and academic excitement warring with a growing sense of dread he couldn't quite rationalize. As they prepared to leave, Elena paused before a fresco they hadn't examined closely before. It showed the interior of the monastery, this very chapel, with the 15 monks seated in their circle. But this image was different from the others. It showed what happened after their deaths. The monks' bodies sat decomposed, reduced to skeletons still holding hands in their ritual circle. But above each body, painted in translucent gold leaf, were suggestions of souls, ghostly figures that looked like the monks but also like something else. They existed in the painting partially, as if the artist had tried to show beings that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, and around them, containing them, was a geometric design of extraordinary complexity. Lines of sacred geometry, mathematical formulas rendered in medieval notation, astronomical symbols, and astrological signs, all interlocking to create a kind of cage or container. Inside this design, barely suggested, was the tall figure of the Watcher, bound by the architecture of the monks' dying souls. Beneath it, one final inscription, the living seal. May it hold until the stars forget to count the years. They're still there, Father Nicolai whispered. That's what this is showing. Their souls didn't pass through the threshold to whatever comes after. They positioned themselves in the threshold space and stayed there. For 677 years, they've been holding that boundary closed, existing in a state between life and death, maintaining the seal with the last remnants of their consciousness. That's impossible, Adrian said. Consciousness doesn't survive death. There's no scientific evidence. There's no scientific evidence for any of this, Father Nicolai interrupted. And yet here we are, standing in a monastery that shouldn't exist, reading manuscripts that shouldn't be possible, looking at frescoes that predict the future with eerie accuracy. At what point do you stop saying impossible and start accepting what the evidence shows you? They drove back to Cluj-Napoca in silence as the sun set over the Carpathian Mountains. Adrian sat in the passenger seat, the manuscripts secured in the trunk, his mind racing through implications he didn't want to accept. Elena broke the silence as they reached the outskirts of the city. What do we do with this? We can't publish it, not as is. No peer-reviewed journal would accept medieval mysticism about dimensional barriers and cosmic cycles. We verify everything first, Adrian said. Carbon dating, ink analysis, paleographic examination. If the manuscripts are authentic 14th century documents, that alone is a significant historical find. We can frame it as discovering the records of a previously unknown monastic order without necessarily endorsing their theological claims. You mean lie about what we found? I mean present the facts in a way the academic community can process. Look, even if we wanted to publish the full story, medieval monks document interdimensional entity. Who would believe us? We'd be laughed out of the profession. Better to establish the historical legitimacy of the Brotherhood first, build credibility, and then slowly reveal the more unusual aspects of their beliefs. Father Nicolai spoke from the back seat. And while you're building credibility and establishing legitimacy, what happens if the seal is actually broken? What happens if opening that vault really did weaken the barrier they died to maintain? Adrian turned to look at him. You don't actually believe that. You can't. The priest met his eyes steadily. I believe that something killed 50 million people in the 14th century. I believe that highly educated men chose to starve themselves to death in a sealed monastery for a reason they considered worth dying for. I believe that the church has maintained watch over those seal sites for 677 years because people wiser than me thought it necessary. Do I believe in interdimensional entities and cosmic cycles? I don't know, but I believe in being cautious when dealing with things I don't understand. And Dr. Petran, you don't understand what you've done, neither do I, but we're going to find out. 3 days later, in his office at the University of Cluj-Napoca, Adrian received the first carbon dating results. Dr. Sorin Aldea, the department's expert in medieval Romanian texts, sat across from him with an expression caught between professional excitement and deep unease. The results came back from the lab, Sorin said, sliding a folder across the desk. The vellum dates to 1345, plus or minus 5 years. The ink is iron gall, chemically consistent with 14th century manufacturing processes. The linguistic analysis confirms Old Church Slavonic, consistent with 14th century Moldavian dialects. So they're authentic, Adrian said, feeling vindication and dread in equal measure. They're authentic, Sorin confirmed, which means we need to talk about what they say. Adrian, I've been reading these manuscripts for 3 days. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see those frescoes, that figure in the doorways, and I keep thinking. He was interrupted by Elena bursting into the office, her laptop open, her face flushed with excitement or fear or both. I found corroboration, independent historical sources. Look at this. She turned her laptop to show a digitized letter from the Vatican secret archives, recently made available to researchers. This is from Pope Sixtus IV to Stephen the Great, dated 1476. The Pope calls Stephen Athleta Christi, champion of Christ, for defending Christianity against the Ottomans. That's well documented. But look at this paragraph that's usually skipped over in historical analyses. She read aloud, "We commend also thy wisdom in maintaining the sacred vigils at the 7 fortified houses of prayer, wherein thy monks keep watch against that which threatens not the body, but the soul's comprehension of divine order." The Holy See acknowledges the burden of this knowledge and the necessity of its concealment from the unlearned masses. Know that thy actions serve not only Moldavia, but all of Christendom, for the barrier thou dost maintain protects the faithful from awareness that would shatter their faith and their reason. Continue in this duty and know that Rome stands with thee in this silent vigil. The 7 fortified houses, Sorin repeated. That's the Brotherhood's monasteries. The Pope knew about them. Elena pulled up another document. This is even better. It's from the Patriarch of Constantinople, written in 1348, right after the Black Death reached the Byzantine Empire. He writes to the Metropolitan of Moldavia, and there's a specific mention of the brothers who have taken upon themselves the burden of watching. He says they have his blessing to maintain their isolation and continue their sacred duty of recording that which must not be forgotten, but also must not be widely known. She zoomed in on a particular passage. The great dying is upon us, as was foreseen by those who study the cycles. The Watcher manifests as it did in Justinian's time, 777 years past. May God grant strength to those who stand at the threshold. May their sacrifice, if sacrifice be required, purchase time for humanity to grow in wisdom and understanding. For this knowledge is too heavy for most to bear. And blessed are those who live in ignorance of what dwells between the moments of life and death. Adrian felt the room spinning slightly. They're talking about it as if it's real. The Patriarch of Constantinople, one of the most powerful religious figures in the medieval world, writing about the Watcher as if it's an established fact. Because to them it was, Elena said. Look, I found references in Armenian manuscripts, in Ethiopian church records, in Chinese Buddhist texts from the same period. Different names, different theological frameworks, but describing the same phenomenon. A manifestation that occurs in regular cycles. A presence that appears at thresholds. The psychological collapse that accompanies it. This isn't just medieval Christian mysticism, it's a cross-cultural observation spanning multiple civilizations that had no contact with each other. Sorin stood, pacing the small office. Okay, let's say, for the sake of argument, that we accept the Brotherhood's account as accurate observation, rather than superstition. What are we actually dealing with? An entity from another dimension that becomes visible during these cycles? The manuscripts are very specific, Adrian said, pulling up his translations on his computer. The Watcher doesn't cross over into our dimension. It exists permanently in what the Brotherhood called threshold space, the liminal dimension between life and death. Every human being passes through this space in the moment of dying, but the passage is normally instantaneous and unconscious. The threshold is like a doorway we walk through without noticing the door itself. But every 777 years, Elena continued, cosmic conditions align in a way that makes the threshold visible to living human consciousness. Not the passage through it, but the space itself. And the Watcher which maintains that space becomes perceivable. The Brotherhood believed it was a fundamental aspect of reality, like gravity or entropy, a cosmic function necessary for the universe to operate. Then why is seeing it so catastrophic? Sorin asked. Adrian pulled up Brother Constantine's most detailed theological manuscript. According to this, human consciousness is structured to exist entirely on one side of the threshold or the other, living or dead. Our minds can't process existing in between, can't comprehend something that dwells permanently in that space. When people see the Watcher clearly, when they become fully aware of the threshold, while still alive, their consciousness tries to understand something it literally cannot understand. The cognitive dissonance is so severe, it shatters the psyche. Constantine describes it in detail, Elena added, reading from her own translation. To look upon the Watcher is to see all possible moments of death simultaneously, not as abstract concept, but as lived experience. You see your own death in every way it might occur, by disease, by violence, by age, by accident. You see the deaths of everyone you know, everyone you've ever seen, everyone who has ever lived or will ever live. You perceive the absolute certainty of mortality with a clarity that the living mind cannot contain. And worse, you become aware that the Watcher has been there all along, observing every death that has ever occurred, standing at the threshold of every transition from life to the afterward, patient and eternal, and completely indifferent to human suffering or joy or existence itself. Jesus Christ, Sorin whispered. The Brotherhood believed, Adrian continued, that this awareness is what made the Black Death so catastrophic. Yes, there was a real plague, Yersinia pestis, spread by fleas on rats, but the Watcher's manifestation created a psychological pandemic that ran parallel to the physical one. People who might have survived the disease instead gave up, unable to cope with the existential weight of seeing the threshold. Others went mad. Society broke down not just from the deaths themselves, but from the collapse of the collective human psyche, under knowledge it wasn't ready to bear. Elena's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned and answered. Dr. Ionescu. Yes, this is Elena Radulescu. Her expression changed as she listened. How many? Since when? A pause. We'll be there in 20 minutes. She ended the call and looked at Adrian and Sorin with barely controlled panic. That was Dr. Mihai Ionescu from the psychiatric hospital. He says they've had 43 admissions in the past 72 hours, all presenting with identical symptoms, all reporting visions of a tall figure in doorways and corners, all describing the same presence watching them from the edges of their perception. 72 hours, Adrian repeated slowly. We opened the vault 72 hours ago. At the psychiatric hospital of Cluj-Napoca, Dr. Mihai Ionescu met them in the administrative wing, looking like he hadn't slept since Elena's call. He was a man in his early 50s with the kind of calm demeanour that came from 25 years of treating mental illness. But now that calm was cracking. "I've been a psychiatrist for a quarter century," he said, leading them through corridors that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. "I've seen every kind of delusion, every type of hallucination, mass psychogenic illness, shared delusions, folie à deux. I know the patterns. This doesn't fit any of them." He pulled up patient files on his tablet as they walked. The first admission came 71 hours ago. A 34-year-old teacher from Cluj, no history of mental illness, no drug use, no recent trauma. She came to the emergency room claiming she'd been seeing a figure standing in her apartment doorway for the past 12 hours. Said it was tall, angular, wrong somehow. Said it didn't move like living things move. It would be in one doorway. She'd blink, and it would be in another. She couldn't look at it directly. Every time she tried to turn and face it fully, it would be gone. But when she looked away, she could sense it watching her. "Sounds like a classic case of sleep paralysis hallucination," Sorin said, "or stress-induced psychosis." "That's what I thought," Mihai agreed, until the second patient arrived 2 hours later, a 60-year-old retiree from the other side of the city. No connection to the first patient, describing the exact same figure, the exact same behaviour, the exact same sensation of being watched from thresholds and corners. He swiped through more files. By the end of the first day, we had 14 patients, all reporting identical experiences, all using similar language to describe something they claimed to be seeing in their peripheral vision. I consulted with colleagues in Bucharest, Iasi, Timisoara. They're seeing the same thing, hundreds of cases across Romania, all within the past 3 days. "Mass hysteria," Adrian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Media coverage creating a social contagion." "There's been no media coverage," Mihai countered. "We've kept this quiet specifically to avoid that kind of contagion effect. These patients don't know about each other. They're not reading news reports or social media posts about similar cases. Yet they're describing identical experiences down to specific details." He stopped at a window overlooking a common room where several patients sat in chairs, all facing different directions, all with the same expression of distant fear. "And then there are the children." Mihai pulled up a folder of drawings on his tablet, crayon pictures from the pediatric psychiatric ward. Children aged 4 to 12, from different families, different neighbourhoods, different backgrounds, all drawing the same thing. A tall, angular figure with too many joints, standing in doorways. Some had added details that made Adrian's blood run cold. The figure seemed to exist in multiple positions simultaneously in some drawings, as if the children had tried to show something their eyes saw, but their minds couldn't quite process. "These children don't know each other," Mihai said. "They haven't been exposed to similar imagery in media. No common movies, no shared video games, no cultural touchpoint that could explain this. Yet they're all drawing the same figure, all describing it appearing in their homes at night, all saying it watches them but never enters their rooms. It stands at the threshold of the door, watching, patient." Elena had gone pale. "Have any of them tried to look at it directly, to turn and face it fully?" Mihai's expression darkened. 3 patients so far, all 3 experienced what I can only describe as acute psychotic breaks. Screaming, convulsions, speaking in languages they shouldn't know. We had to sedate them. When they came out of sedation, they were different, present but not present. Their eyes track movement, they respond to basic stimuli, but it's like the person they were is gone, replaced by something that's just going through the motions of being human. He led them to an observation room. Through the one-way glass, they could see a woman in her 30s sitting on a hospital bed, perfectly still, staring at the corner where the walls met the ceiling. "This is the first patient who looked directly at it," Mihai said. "Alexandra Popescu, high school mathematics teacher, By all accounts, brilliant woman. Published papers in her field. 2 children at home. No history of mental illness. Adrian watched as Alexandra's lips moved soundlessly. What is she saying? Mihai activated the room's audio feed. Alexandra's voice came through, whispering in a constant stream. Every death. All at once. The child who falls from the tree. The old man who sleeps and doesn't wake. The mother in childbirth. The soldier in war. The driver who turns too late. Every way, every moment, every single soul that passes the threshold. It watches them all. It's been watching since the first cell divided and died. It will watch until the last star goes cold. Patient. Eternal. Necessary. The mechanism of ending. The function of transition. I see it all. I cannot unsee it. I cannot. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes refocusing on the corner. It's there now, in this room. Can you see it? No, of course not. You're blessed with ignorance. Lucky you. Lucky, lucky you. I looked. I turned and I looked. And now I'll never stop seeing it. Every threshold, every doorway, every space between moments. It's always there, always watching, always... Mihai muted the audio. She's been like this for 48 hours. Hasn't eaten, barely drinks. Just sits there staring at corners, describing what she sees. The neurological scans show normal brain function. No tumours, no lesions, no physical cause for this. But psychologically, she's gone. Whatever made her Alexandra is no longer accessible. What about the other 2 who looked directly? Soren asked. Similar states. One of them started speaking in what our linguist consultant identified as medieval Latin. Not modern Latin, not church Latin, but the Latin spoken in 14th century Rome. The other patient... Mihai hesitated. The other patient speaks in a language no one can identify. The sounds hurt to hear. Several staff members who spent extended time with him have reported headaches, nausea, a feeling that the syllables shouldn't be possible from a human throat. Adrian felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. This started 72 hours ago, the exact time we opened the vault at the monastery. What vault? Mihai asked sharply. Adrian, what did you do? They told him everything. The monastery, the manuscripts, the Brotherhood of Seven Seals, the warnings about the Watcher and the Threshold, the frescoes predicting manifestations every 777 years, the sacrifice of 15 monks who died to create a seal that had held for 677 years. Until 3 days ago. Mihai listened in silence, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern to a kind of horrified acceptance. When they finished, he stood and walked to the window overlooking Cluj-Napoca's evening skyline. I'm a man of science, he said quietly. I believe in neurotransmitters and cognitive behavioral therapy and evidence-based medicine. I don't believe in interdimensional entities or cosmic cycles or medieval mysticism. He turned to face them. But I believe in what I can observe, and I'm observing a phenomenon that has no scientific explanation. Hundreds of people across multiple cities experiencing identical hallucinations, with no common cause. Children drawing the same figure they've never been exposed to. Patients speaking languages they've never learned. And all of it starting exactly when you open that vault. Correlation doesn't imply causation, Soren said weakly. No, Mihai agreed. But sometimes correlation is all you have until the causation becomes undeniable. And right now I'm watching people shatter psychologically for reasons I cannot explain, and the timing is too precise to ignore. Adrian's phone buzzed. Father Nikolai, he answered, his hand shaking slightly. Dr. Petran, the priest's voice was tight with urgency. You need to come to Putna Monastery. Now. Something's happened to the frescoes. They made the drive to Putna in near silence, the Carpathian Mountains rising dark against the sunset. Father Nikolai met them at the monastery gates, his face ashen, his hands clutching his prayer rope so tightly the knuckles were white. "I've served this monastery for 30 years, he said without preamble. "I've studied these frescoes since I was a boy. I know every brushstroke, every saint's face, every detail. They've been unchanged for 500 years. "What happened?" Elena asked. The priest led them into the main chapel. The frescoes that decorated the walls were masterpieces of medieval art. Vibrant scenes from the Bible, portraits of saints, Stephen the Great's victories immortalized in egg tempera and gold leaf. "This fresco," Father Nicolai said, pointing to the Last Judgment scene painted on the western wall, "was completed in 1466. We have historical documentation, scholarly analyses, hundreds of photographs spanning decades. I know this painting like I know the Creed." Adrian looked at it. Christ in glory, angels with trumpets, the righteous ascending to heaven on the left, the damned descending to hell on the right. Traditional Byzantine iconography, perfectly preserved. "I don't see what," he began, then stopped. There, barely visible, in the shadows behind the damned souls, was a figure that hadn't been there in any photograph, any scholarly analysis, any historical description. Tall, angular, standing at the threshold between the painted hell and the painted world, existing somehow in both spaces and neither. The Watcher. "That wasn't there yesterday," Father Nicolai said. "I conduct services every morning and evening. I've looked at this fresco 20,000 times. That figure appeared sometime between last night's Vespers and this morning's Matins." "Paint doesn't just appear," Soren insisted, moving closer to examine the wall. He reached up tentatively, touched the surface. His fingers came away clean. "The paint is dry, ancient. It's integrated with the original work. It doesn't look like an addition. It looks like..." He swallowed hard. "It looks like it was always there, like we just never noticed it before." Elena was already checking other frescoes, her flashlight beam travelling across the walls. "Here, the Annunciation, in the doorway behind Mary. It's there." They moved through the chapel systematically, finding it in fresco after fresco. The Nativity, standing at the entrance to the stable. The Crucifixion present at the threshold between Golgotha and Jerusalem. The Resurrection, watching from the mouth of the tomb. The Ascension visible in the space between earth and heaven. Always at thresholds, always watching. Father Nicolai had pulled out documentation from the monastery's archives. Photographs of the frescoes taken over decades, scholarly publications, restoration reports. They compared the images methodically. The recent photographs, taken within the past week, showed subtle differences from older ones. Shadows slightly darker here, background details shifted there. But the changes had been gradual enough to escape notice, until this morning, when the figure had become undeniable. "This is impossible," Soren kept repeating, but his voice had lost its conviction. "The Brotherhood's manuscripts describe this," Adrian said, pulling up his translations on his phone. "Listen, when the seal weakens, the Watcher's presence bleeds across the boundary between dimensions. It appears first in sacred images in places where the threshold has been depicted by faithful hands. Icons change, frescoes shift, paintings reveal what was always there but hidden from awareness. This is the first sign of manifestation, the Watcher making itself known in the spaces between worlds." Father Nicolai had been studying the Last Judgment fresco with a magnifying glass. "There's something else. Look at the eyes." Adrian leaned in close. The Watcher's eyes, barely suggested in the painting, more absence than presence, seemed to track movement. As he shifted his position, the angle of its gaze appeared to shift with him. "That's an optical illusion," Soren said, "like those portraits where the eyes seem to follow you. It's a trick of perspective." "Then why did it only start doing it today?" Father Nicolai asked. "Why did no art historian ever comment on this effect in 500 years of study?" They had no answer. The drive back to Cluj-Napoca felt longer than it should have. Adrian sat in the passenger seat, watching the forest slide past in the gathering darkness, trying to construct a rational framework for what they'd witnessed. Paint appearing on walls, patients hallucinating identical figures, children drawing the same image, all starting exactly when they'd opened a vault that had been sealed for 677 years. "We need to go back," Elena said suddenly, "to the Monastery of Seven Seals. If opening the vault weakened the seal, maybe we can close it again. Relock the doors, perform some kind of ritual to reinforce the binding." "That's not how it works," Adrian said, though he wasn't sure how he knew. The seal wasn't physical. It was made of the Brotherhood's dying souls, their consciousness position and in the threshold space. Closing a door won't restore what we broke. "Then what do we do?" Adrian didn't have an answer. Back at the university, they worked through the night, translating more of Brother Constantine's manuscripts, searching desperately for some indication of what to do if the seal was broken. The monk's handwriting deteriorated as the entries progressed, becoming more frantic, less controlled. May 15th, 1347. Brother Petru made the mistake today during Matins. He perceived the Watcher standing beside the iconostasis. Rather than averting his eyes as we are trained to do, he looked directly upon it, attempting to see it fully. His mind could not process what he witnessed. He screamed for 6 hours. When he finally fell silent, he could speak only in languages unknown to us, tongues that hurt the ear to hear, syllables that seemed to come from no human throat. His eyes see things we cannot. He points to empty air and describes entire realities existing in the spaces between our moments. We have confined him to the cell for his own protection and ours. May God have mercy on his soul, which departed his body without his body dying. May 28th, 1347. The reports from the other monasteries grow more disturbing. Brother Andrei from the northern seal site sent word before their messenger died on the road. The Watcher appeared to them during Vespers, standing among the monks as if it had always been there. The brothers who looked directly at it fell into fits. 2 have died, not from any physical ailment, but as if their souls simply left their bodies, unable to bear remaining. The others speak in the tongues of the dead, reciting words in languages that have been forgotten for centuries. How do they know these words? What are they seeing in the threshold that allows them to speak as the departed speak? June 1st, 1347. The plague has arrived. Ships from the east brought it to Constantinople, and from there it spreads like fire through dry grass. But the plague is not the true catastrophe. I have seen people die from disease. This is different. They see the Watcher first, and the seeing breaks something in them. They lose the will to live. They walk toward death as if called by a voice only they can hear. The plague kills the body, but the Watcher kills the spirit, the will, the essential spark that makes humans fight for survival. This is why the dying is so terrible. This is why whole cities fall silent. Not disease alone, but the collective awareness of the threshold, the knowledge that something watches our passage from life to death with patient, eternal interest. June 10th, 1347. We are 15 now, all that remains of 280 brothers. The plague took most. Starvation will take the rest of us. We have made our choice. Tomorrow we seal the doors. We have fasted for 4 days, purifying ourselves for the ritual. We will join hands in the circle. We will position our consciousness in the threshold space, not crossing over entirely, but existing in that liminal dimension between life and death. And we will hold that position as our bodies fail. Our dying souls will become the seal itself, binding the Watcher in its proper place, strengthening the barrier between dimensions. June 13th, 1347. The final entry before the ritual. I write these words by candlelight as my brothers sleep fitfully, dreaming of what tomorrow brings. We are afraid. I will not lie and claim holy courage. We are terrified. To position oneself in the threshold while still living is to experience what no human should experience: the dissolution of consciousness, the fragmentation of self, the awareness of every possible death stretching out in infinite variations. Brother Petru gave us a glimpse of what awaits. His screams still echo in my memory. But we have no choice. The binding ritual failed. We were too few, and the Watcher is too strong. This is our last option, to become a living seal, a barrier made not of stone or prayer, but of our own souls holding the threshold closed even as we die. I do not know if it will work. I do not know if our sacrifice will be sufficient, but I know we must try. For if the Watcher manifests fully, if all of humanity becomes aware of the threshold while still living, the result will be catastrophic beyond imagining. Better that 15 souls suffer eternal imprisonment in the liminal space than millions suffer the madness of premature awareness. If someone reads this in the future, if our seal holds long enough for the next cycle to arrive, please know that we died willingly. We chose this burden, and we pray that those who come after us find a better way, a way that doesn't require sacrifice, a way for humanity to evolve beyond the need for our deaths to protect their ignorance. But until that day, maintain the seals. Do not open the doors. Do not seek to understand what we have contained. Some knowledge destroys the mind that holds it. Some truths are too heavy to bear. Tomorrow we die. Tomorrow the seal is made. Tomorrow we step into the threshold and pray we have the strength to hold it closed for as long as necessary. May God have mercy on us. May our sacrifice not be in vain. May the Watcher remain bound until humanity is ready to face it. Brother Constantine, last scribe of the Brotherhood of Seven Seals, writing on the last night of my life as a fully living man. Tomorrow I become something else, something between, something that holds the door closed while existing in the doorway itself. May it hold, may it hold, may it hold. Elena closed the manuscript with shaking hands. They knew exactly what they were doing. They understood the cost and chose it anyway. Adrian's phone buzzed. A text from Mihai. 73 new admissions tonight. The count is accelerating. Whatever is happening, it's spreading. Over the following weeks, Adrian watched helplessly as the phenomenon grew. The psychiatric cases multiplied exponentially. 200, 500, 1,000. Not just in Romania, but spreading outward in a pattern that made his skin crawl. Italy first, then France, then England. Everywhere the Black Death had touched in 1347, people now reported visions of the Watcher. Eleanor had stopped sleeping. The dark circles under her eyes deepened daily, and Adrian noticed her flinching at shadows, turning quickly to look at doorways, checking corners with increasing frequency. "You're seeing it," he said one night in the office, too exhausted for subtlety. She didn't deny it. "Not clearly, not yet, but I feel it. Like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark. I don't have to see the drop to know it's there. It's in my peripheral vision. In the spaces between moments, every doorway, every corner, every threshold between one room and another. If I could just turn fast enough, I know I'd see it fully." "Don't," Adrian said urgently, gripping her arm. "Elena, don't look directly at it. Remember what happened to Alexandra Popescu. Remember Brother Petru. Direct observation is what shatters the mind." "I know, I'm trying, but Adrian, it's getting harder. It's like an itch in my consciousness I can't scratch. The brain wants completion. It wants to solve the puzzle, see the thing that's just out of view. Every instinct screams to turn and look, to finally see clearly what I know is there. Then we need to find a solution faster, before anyone else makes that mistake." Sorin had given up his skepticism entirely. He'd spent the past month diving deep into the Brotherhood's manuscripts, cross-referencing with historical accounts. building a comprehensive timeline of the manifestation cycles. His office was covered in papers, charts, diagrams, trying to make sense of cosmic patterns that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. "I found something," he said, calling them to his office at 2 a.m. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Look at this." The Brotherhood documented 6 previous cycles before 570 AD. They didn't have written records that far back, but they referenced oral traditions, legends from ancient civilizations. He displayed a timeline on his computer, around 2055 BC. Unclear evidence, but multiple ancient texts reference a time of great dying when the gods walked among men and men went mad from the sight. Coincides with collapse of several Bronze Age civilizations. Around 1278 BC, more solid documentation. Egyptian texts describe a plague of the mind, where the dead god appears in doorways and men flee from the sight of him. Late Bronze Age collapse follows shortly after. Around 501 BC, Greek and Persian records both mention mass hallucinations and psychological collapse during a period of plague. Herodotus writes about the figure that stands in thresholds and steals the minds of men. 76 AD. Roman sources describe an outbreak of madness during the Flavian period. Tacitus mentions a presence that appears in the spaces between, neither living nor dead, that drives men to despair when perceived. 570 AD. The Justinian Plague. This is when the Brotherhood was founded, when someone first thought to systematically document and study the phenomenon. 1347 AD, the Black Death. The Brotherhood's failed attempt to contain it, their final sacrifice to create the seal, and if the pattern holds, 2124 AD, the next cycle. "But it's 2025, Adrian said. "We're 99 years early." "Because you broke the seal," Soren said, and there was no accusation in his voice, only grim acceptance. The Brotherhood's sacrifice was supposed to hold until the next natural cycle, their souls positioned in the threshold, maintaining the barrier for 777 years. But seals weaken over time, especially artificial ones. And when you opened that vault, when you broke those 7 locks, you didn't just open a door, you disrupted the geometry of binding they created with their deaths. Elena pulled up a different document. "I've been researching the other seal sites, the 6 supporting monasteries that formed the hexagonal arrangement around the central site. Soren, show them what you found about their recent history." Soren displayed a map of the Bukovina region, marking 7 locations in a perfect hexagonal pattern with the Monastery of Seven Seals at the centre. Site 1, the ruins near Moldovita. The modern monastery was built in 1532 by Petru Reris, but it was constructed on top of an earlier foundation, one of the original Brotherhood sites. Last September, a section of the ruins collapsed. Officials said it was due to erosion. Engineers I consulted said the collapse pattern was unusual, as if something had systematically weakened the structural integrity from the inside. Site 2, near Susavita, another of Stephen the Great's monasteries built over a Brotherhood site. In December, vandals broke in, and specifically targeted the oldest frescoes in the crypt, paintings that dated back to the 1300s. The vandalism was bizarrely precise. They defaced only the medieval frescoes, leaving the more recent artwork untouched. Site 3, near Putna. A small chapel in the forest that few people know about. It burned down in January. No electrical wiring, no lightning strike, no apparent cause. Just suddenly engulfed in flames that consumed it completely in under an hour. Site 4, 5 and 6, similar stories, structural collapses, mysterious fires, targeted vandalism, all within the past 18 months, all affecting the oldest parts of the structures, the sections that would have dated to the Brotherhood's era. Adrian felt ice in his stomach. Someone was systematically destroying them, weakening the geometry of binding. "Or something," Elena said quietly. The manuscripts mention that as the seal weakens, the Watcher's influence can bleed across the barrier. It can't cross over fully, but it can affect our world in subtle ways, inspire thoughts, guide actions, make people do things that weaken the binding without fully understanding why they're doing it. That's, Soren trailed off, that's terrifying in a whole new way. Father Nikolai had joined their research team, bringing with him centuries of orthodox theological knowledge and access to church archives most academics never saw. He'd been consulting with other priests across the Painted Monastery region, gathering oral histories and secret traditions that had been passed down through generations. I spoke with the abbot of Nemt Monastery, he reported. He's 93 years old, served the church his entire life. He told me something his predecessor told him when he was first ordained. He said that every generation there's a secret council of 7 priests who serve as watchkeepers. They monitor the seal sites, report any unusual phenomena, maintain certain prayers and rituals that Stephen the Great established when he built the monasteries. And, Adrian prompted, and 3 months ago all 7 watchkeepers died within a week of each other. Different causes, heart attack, stroke, accidents, but all 7, all in 1 week. The church was trying to appoint replacements when you opened the vault. The timing, he shook his head. The abbot said it was as if something knew the watchkeepers were vulnerable, knew their deaths would create a window of opportunity. How would it know? Soren asked. Because it's been watching for 677 years, Father Nikolai said. The Brotherhood positioned themselves in the threshold to hold the seal, but that meant they were also in proximity to the Watcher itself. They've been in the same dimensional space for nearly 7 centuries. Do you think the Watcher ignored them? Do you think it didn't learn from them, observe them, understand the nature of the binding they'd created? Adrian felt sick. You're saying it's been waiting, planning, working toward this for centuries. I'm saying it's patient. The manuscripts describe it that way, patient and eternal. It doesn't experience time the way we do. To something that exists in the threshold space, outside normal causality, 677 years might feel like moments. And it's been using those moments to understand the seal, to find its weaknesses, to create conditions for its eventual release. Mihai joined them frequently now, bringing updates from the psychiatric wards that grew more disturbing by the day. The patient count had topped 3,000 in Romania alone. Globally, the numbers were climbing toward 50,000. We're seeing a progression, he explained during one late-night meeting. The early patients reported vague sensations of being watched. The more recent ones described seeing the figure clearly in their peripheral vision. And the newest cases, he paused, choosing his words carefully. The newest cases are starting to interact with it. What does that mean? Elena asked. They're having conversations, or what they describe as conversations. The Watcher doesn't speak. They all emphasize that. But when they're aware of its presence, thoughts appear in their minds. Knowledge they shouldn't have. Understanding of things beyond their education or experience. He pulled up a case file. This patient is a 19-year-old engineering student. No background in medieval history, no knowledge of Byzantine theology. But for the past 3 days, she's been speaking fluent Old Church Slavonic, a language she's never studied. When we ask her how she knows it, she says the Watcher shows her. That when it's present, she can perceive things from the threshold space, memories that aren't hers, knowledge accumulated across centuries. The Brotherhood, Adrian breathed. Their consciousness has been in the threshold for 677 years. If the barrier is weakening, if the seal is breaking, maybe their knowledge is leaking through, becoming accessible to people who can perceive the threshold clearly enough. There's more, Mihai said. 3 patients who looked directly at the Watcher have started speaking in unison. Not coordinated. They're in different rooms, separated by floors. but when they speak, they say the same words at the same time, in perfect synchronization. He played a recording. 3 voices, male and female, young and old, speaking together in that strange layered tone that made Adrian's skin crawl. The vigil is ending. 7 seals, 7 locks, 7 souls holding the door closed. But we are tired, so very tired. 677 years in the threshold, existing between life and death, holding the boundary with the last strength of our dissolving consciousness. We thought we could hold it until 21, 24. We thought the seal would last until humanity was ready. But the seal is breaking. The geometry is disrupted, the door opens, and we are finally free to let go. "Brother Constantine," Elena whispered. "That's the Brotherhood speaking. Through the patience." Adrian's hands trembled as he stopped the recording. They're still there, still holding the seal even after 677 years. But they're failing. The destruction of the support sites weakened the geometry. Opening the central vault disrupted the binding, and now they're too weak to maintain it. "How long?" Father Nikolai asked. "How long until the seal fails completely?" No one had an answer. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Christina Morar, Elena's research assistant, was a PhD student, specializing in medieval religious art. She'd been studying the frescoes at the Monastery of Seven Seals, photographing every panel, analyzing the symbolic content with the kind of obsessive detail that made great academics. 3 weeks after the vault was opened, Christina stopped coming to the university. Eleanor tried calling, texting, visiting her apartment. No response. Her roommate said Christina had been spending 12, 14, 16 hours a day staring at the fresco photographs on her computer, barely eating, not sleeping. "She kept saying she could see something in the paintings," the roommate reported, "some pattern or message that everyone else was missing. She said the monks were trying to tell us something, that the frescoes weren't just documentation but instruction. They found Christina at the hospital. She'd been admitted the previous night after her roommate found her standing motionless in their apartment, staring at the corner of the living room, whispering in a language the roommate didn't recognize. Mihai led them to her room in the psychiatric ward. Christina sat on the edge of the hospital bed, perfectly still, her eyes focused on something no one else could see. "Christina," Elena approached cautiously, "can you hear me?" Christina's head turned slowly, mechanically, until her eyes met Elena's. When she spoke, her voice had that same layered quality they'd heard in the recording, as if multiple people spoke through her throat simultaneously. "Dr. Radulescu," she said, and it wasn't quite Christina's voice. "Thank you for coming. We've been waiting to speak with you." Adrian felt cold spread through his chest. "Who is we?" Christina smiled, but it was wrong. Too wide, stretching her face in ways human muscles shouldn't allow. "The Brotherhood of Seven Seals greets you from the threshold. We have been here since 1347, caught between life and death, maintaining the ward with our slowly dissolving souls. We held the boundary for 677 years while the world forgot we existed. But the seal is shattered now. Our sacrifice was for nothing. The Watcher manifests and we are finally free to stop watching." "Free to go where?" Elena asked, her voice shaking. "To dissolution. To the final rest we denied ourselves for nearly 7 centuries. Our purpose is finished." The thing speaking through Christina tilted her head at an angle that made Adrian's neck hurt to look at. "Yours begins." "What do you mean?" Adrian demanded. "What are we supposed to do?" "The same thing we did, or find a better way. Those are the only options." Christina's borrowed smile faded. "We tried to hold the Watcher until 21, 24, when the next natural cycle would have occurred. By then, we hoped, humanity would have evolved enough to handle the knowledge, to see the threshold without shattering. But you broke the seal early. You called the Watcher's attention, and now it manifests in 2025, when you are utterly unprepared. How do we stop it? Soren asked. How do we reseal it? The same way we did. Sacrifice. Living souls willing to position themselves in the threshold and hold it closed. We required 49 brothers for the great binding ritual, 7 at each of the 7 sites. We had only 15, so we chose to die slowly, our souls becoming the seal itself as our bodies failed. Christina's expression shifted, became almost compassionate, almost pitying. Could you find people willing to make that choice? To exist in the threshold space, neither alive nor dead, holding the boundary for centuries? Father Nikolay stepped forward. I would do it, if that's what's required. Christina looked at him with ancient eyes. You say that now, Father, but you don't understand what you're offering. The threshold is not peaceful contemplation. It's not prayer and meditation. It's the space where consciousness fragments, where time loses meaning, where every moment of potential death plays out simultaneously in infinite variation. We have endured that for 677 years. We are diminished now, worn down to almost nothing. Would you choose that fate? Would you trade your eternal soul for an eternal vigil in the space between life and death? If it's the only way to protect the world from this knowledge, Nikolay said steadily, then yes. Then you have more courage than most, because Christina paused, and for a moment, her real voice broke through. I'm Christina Popescu. I'm 27 years old. I study medieval art. I have a cat and a family and a life I want to live. But I looked at the threshold too long, and now I exist partially in that space. I feel what the Brotherhood feels. I see what they see. And Father, it's terrible. It's beautiful and terrible. More than a human mind can hold. I'm terrified of it. Then the layered voice returned. But she speaks truth. The vigil requires sacrifice, not death alone, but conscious, willing positioning in the threshold space. Souls that choose to hold the boundary even as they dissolve across dimensions. Adrian's mind raced. There has to be another way. The Brotherhood was working with medieval understanding, medieval tools. We have modern science, modern knowledge. Maybe we can find a different solution. Christina laughed, and it was a sound like breaking glass. What does science know of the threshold? What equations describe the space between life and death? What instruments can measure something that exists outside causality? You cannot solve this with science any more than the Brotherhood could solve it with prayer. The Watcher is not a problem to be solved. It is a fundamental aspect of reality, like gravity, like entropy. You cannot unmake it. You can only maintain the boundary that keeps it from human awareness. Then teach us, Elena said suddenly. You've existed in the threshold. You understand it. Teach us how to position consciousness there without fully crossing over. Teach us the meditation techniques, the rituals, the methods the Brotherhood used. To what end? Christina asked. To buy time, to find a better solution. The Brotherhood held the seal for 677 years. Maybe we can hold it for 70, for 7, for however long it takes to figure out a way to close the threshold permanently, or to help humanity evolve enough to handle the knowledge. Christina was silent for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. A kind of weary recognition. There may be one option we didn't try. The Brotherhood focused on sealing the Watcher away, on maintaining humanity's ignorance. But what if that's the wrong approach? What if the solution is not to hide the knowledge, but to prepare people to receive it? How? Adrian asked. Gradual exposure, controlled awareness, like building immunity to a poison by taking small doses. If people can be taught to perceive the threshold in increments, to understand it conceptually before seeing it directly, perhaps the shock would be less catastrophic. That's insane, Soren said. You're talking about deliberately exposing people to something that drives them mad. I'm talking about inoculation, Christina countered. The Brotherhood's error was binary thinking, either complete ignorance or catastrophic awareness. But consciousness exists on a spectrum. It should be possible to create stages of understanding. Theoretical knowledge first, then peripheral awareness, then partial visualization, building up to full perception over time, giving the mind space to adapt to each level before progressing to the next. That would take generations, Elena said. Yes, which means you need to maintain the seal in the short term while developing the long-term solution. You need both approaches. Sacrifice to hold the boundary now, and education to eliminate the need for sacrifice in the future. Father Nikolai had been praying quietly. Now he looked up. How many people would we need to hold the seal temporarily while this inoculation process develops? The Brotherhood required 49 for the full ritual, but we achieved partial binding with 15. If you had 7 people willing to position themselves in the threshold, 1 at each seal site, and a larger group maintaining supportive meditations, it might be sufficient. The binding wouldn't be as strong as our original seal, but it could hold for years, decades, if you're fortunate. And what happens to those 7 people? Adrian asked quietly. Christina met his eyes. They exist in the threshold. They experience what I'm experiencing now, simultaneous awareness of all possible deaths, all possible endings, all the ways consciousness dissolves across the boundary. Time becomes meaningless. Self becomes fragmented. They will hold that position until they can no longer endure it, or until their consciousness finally dissolves entirely. That's a death sentence, Soren said. No, Christina corrected. It's worse than death. Death is an ending. This is an eternal becoming, an endless transition that never completes. The Brotherhood has been dying for 677 years. Their souls exist in a state of constant dissolution, neither alive enough to end, nor dead enough to be at peace. If you ask people to take their place, you're asking them to suffer that fate. The room fell silent. I'll do it, Elena said quietly. Eleanor, no, Adrian began. I'm already halfway there, she interrupted. I see it constantly now, feel it watching from every corner, every doorway. At least this way, my awareness serves a purpose. I can hold the threshold closed instead of just suffering the knowledge of it. I'm with her, Father Nikolai said. This is what I've been preparing for my entire life, even if I didn't know it. Over the following days, others volunteered. 4 Orthodox monks who had spent their lives in contemplation and prayer. A quantum physicist named Dr. Stefan Vasile, who said the theoretical concepts of the threshold aligned with certain interpretations of quantum mechanics. A philosophy professor named Dr. Anca Grigorescu, who had written her dissertation on the phenomenology of death and dying. 7 people willing to sacrifice themselves, to position their consciousness in the threshold space and hold it closed while humanity struggled to find a better solution. Adrian hated it. Hated that the conversation had arrived at this point. Hated that they were asking people to give up their lives, or worse than their lives, for this cause. But he saw no alternative. They spent 2 weeks preparing. Christina, speaking with the Brotherhood's layered voice, taught them meditation techniques to partially enter threshold space, how to position consciousness between states, how to perceive the boundary without looking directly at the watcher, how to maintain sanity while existing in a dimension human minds weren't designed to occupy. The training was brutal. Each session left the participants shaking, sweating, sometimes weeping, from the psychic weight of even brief contact with the threshold. But they persevered. Father Nikolai proved surprisingly adept at the practice. His decades of orthodox meditation gave him a framework for understanding altered states of consciousness. Elena struggled more. Her awareness of the watcher was already too acute, making it difficult to control the depth of her perception. Dr. Vasile approached it like a scientific experiment, meticulously documenting each session, noting the subjective effects, trying to build a theoretical model, even as the experience exceeded anything his equations could describe. Adrian observed every session, documenting everything, knowing that this knowledge would be essential for future generations. If the seal held for even 20 or 30 years, they needed detailed records of how it was created, how to maintain it, how to eventually replace it with something better. Mihai monitored the participants' psychological state, watching for signs of breakdown. He'd never been more out of his depth professionally, but his clinical experience with trauma and altered states proved invaluable. Meanwhile, the manifestation accelerated. The patient count topped 75,000 globally. Reports came from every continent. People seeing the figure in doorways, children drawing the same image, psychiatric wards overwhelmed with cases of identical delusions. The media could no longer ignore it. News outlets called it a mass psychogenic illness, a global pandemic of the mind. Experts proposed explanations ranging from environmental toxins to social media contagion to mass hysteria triggered by collective anxiety. No one suspected the truth that an interdimensional entity was manifesting in human awareness for the third recorded time in history, that the boundary between life and death had become visible to thousands of people, that the comfortable ignorance of mortality was being replaced by unbearable knowledge of the threshold. They gathered at the Monastery of Seven Seals on a cold morning in late March, 3 months after Adrian had opened the vault. The 7 volunteers, Elena, Father Nicolae, the 4 monks, Dr. Vasile, had spent the night in prayer and meditation, preparing for what came next. 16 others had joined them, scholars, monks, ordinary people who believed and wanted to help. They would form the meditation circle, the support network that would maintain the binding, while the 7 anchors held their position in the threshold. Adrian felt like he was attending a funeral. In a sense, he was. The 7 were about to die to themselves, to cross partway into the threshold and remain there indefinitely. They would still breathe, still have heartbeats, but the people they had been would be gone, replaced by something that existed between states. The vault that Adrian had opened 3 months ago had been transformed into a meditation chamber, cleaned and sanctified according to Orthodox tradition. Father Nicolae had painted new frescoes on the walls, not the terrifying images of the Watcher, but peaceful scenes of souls ascending to heaven, of Christ trampling down death, of light conquering darkness. Even in the threshold, he'd explained, we need reminders of hope. The Brotherhood forgot that. They focused so intently on the horror of what they faced that they lost sight of anything beautiful. We won't make that mistake. The ritual began at dawn. The 7 anchors positioned themselves in the meditation chamber in a circle, sitting in traditional Orthodox prayer posture. The 16 supporters arranged themselves in the chapel above, forming a larger circle around the chamber. Christina guided them through the process, her voice calm despite the visible strain on her face. She'd been spending more time in threshold space than normal reality. Soon she would cross over entirely, but for now she could still serve as a bridge, helping the volunteers make the transition. Focus on the space between breaths, she instructed. Not the inhale or the exhale, but the pause between them. That's where the threshold exists. In the gaps, in the transitions, in the moments between moments. Let your consciousness settle into that space. Adrian watched from the chamber entrance, unable to participate but unwilling to leave. He'd caused this, his academic curiosity, his inability to leave the vault unopened, his need to know. It had led to this moment. 7 people sacrificing themselves to fix what he'd broken. The volunteers sank into meditation, their breathing synchronizing. The air grew thick with something Adrian couldn't name. Presence, potential, the weight of dimensions, pressing against each other like tectonic plates grinding before an earthquake. In the chamber, the seven went deeper. Adrian saw their expressions change, becoming distant. Not vacant, like the psychiatric patients, but focused on something far away. Elena's face went slack, her eyes open but unseeing. She was crossing over, positioning herself in the threshold space. The others followed. Father Nicolay's lips moved in silent prayer. The monks maintained their traditional postures with centuries of discipline behind them. Dr. Vasile sat perfectly still, his scientist's mind attempting to comprehend something beyond science. Hours passed. The meditation deepened. Adrian felt reality shifting around him, as if the monastery existed in multiple states simultaneously. He caught glimpses of things at the edges of vision, shadows that weren't shadows, movements that couldn't be movement, a sense of vast spaces opening up in the corners of the room. And then Elena screamed, not a sound of pain, but of overwhelming realization. Her eyes flew open, wide, staring at something no one else could see. Her mouth opened, and words poured out in a language that made Adrian's ears hurt. Oh God, I see it. I see all of it. Every death, every ending, every transition. The child struck by illness. The old woman whose heart simply stops. The soldier who doesn't see the bullet coming. Every soul that has ever passed the threshold. Every moment of dissolution. Every... Father Nicolay's voice cut through, strong and certain despite his own fear. Do not look directly at the Watcher. Keep it in peripheral awareness. You are in the threshold, but you are not lost. You are an anchor. Find your center. Hold your position. Elena's screaming cut off abruptly. Her breathing steadied, but her eyes remained wide, seeing visions Adrian couldn't imagine. One by one, the others made the crossing. One by one, they screamed or gasped or made sounds that no human throat should make as they perceived the threshold fully for the first time. And one by one, Father Nicolay guided them back to coherence, teaching them to exist in that impossible space without fragmenting entirely. Dr. Vasile began speaking in rapid German, reciting complex mathematical formulas. One of the monks started singing in ancient Greek, a Byzantine chant from the 6th century. Another spoke in what Christina identified as Aramaic, the language of Christ. They were accessing knowledge from the threshold itself, drawing on the accumulated awareness of every soul that had ever crossed that boundary. By sunset, all seven had achieved the transition. They sat in their circle, eyes open but unseeing, consciousness split between normal reality and threshold space. Their breathing synchronized perfectly. Their heartbeats, Adrian noted, with his medical training, had slowed to barely 40 beats per minute. They were still alive, but they were also something else now. Something between. Christina collapsed when it was done, her strength finally exhausted. Adrian caught her, shocked by how light she'd become. She seemed insubstantial, as if parts of her had already dissolved into threshold space. It's working, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I can feel it. The seal is reforming, not as strong as the Brotherhood's original binding, but sufficient. The Watcher is contained. For how long? Adrian asked. As long as they can hold it. Years, decades, centuries, if they prove stronger than we were. She smiled faintly. I'm letting go now. I've done what I needed to do. Christina, don't... It's okay, she said. Her eyes were closing. I'm tired, Adrian. So tired. The threshold is peaceful in its way. Once you stop fighting it, once you accept what it represents, there's a kind of beauty there. The Brotherhood understood that after 677 years. They learned to see the necessity of it, the function it serves. Her breathing slowed, stopped, and Christina Morat, research assistant and involuntary bridge between dimensions, crossed the threshold fully and finally. Adrian felt tears on his face. He'd lost a student, a colleague, someone who'd been dragged into this through no fault of her own, except proximity to his research. In the chamber below, the 7 anchors sat in silent vigil. They would remain there indefinitely, their consciousness split between dimensions, existing in threshold space to keep the Watcher contained. Elena was among them. Father Nikolai too. They'd given up their lives to protect humanity from knowledge it wasn't ready to possess. Adrian emerged from the monastery into cold evening air. Stars were emerging above the Carpathian mountains, ancient light from ancient sources. He thought about time, about cycles, about the pattern that would repeat in 2124 when the next natural manifestation occurred. Would humanity be ready then? Over the following weeks, Adrian watched the global effects begin to recede. The psychiatric admissions slowed. Patients who had been catatonic started to recover, their awareness of the threshold diminishing as the new binding took effect. The frescoes at Putna stopped changing. The reports of shared visions decreased. The seal was holding. But at what cost? At the Monastery of Seven Seals, the vigil continued. The 7 anchors sat in their circle, maintained by the 16 meditators who rotated in shifts, ensuring continuous support for the binding. They didn't speak. They barely moved. They existed in that impossible space between life and death, holding closed a door that should never have been opened. Adrian visited monthly, bringing supplies, coordinating with the meditators, documenting the ongoing effects. He never spoke to the anchors. They existed too deep in threshold space to maintain normal communication. But he felt their presence, their conscious choice to hold the boundary. Elena most of all. He sensed her awareness in the shadows, in the quiet moments, in the spaces between heartbeats. She was there, existing in that liminal dimension, watching the Watcher so humanity didn't have to. He'd started writing everything down, not just the academic analysis, but the full story. The warnings they'd ignored, the seals they'd broken, the price of knowledge they hadn't been ready to receive. Future generations would need this information. When 2124 arrived, humanity would face the choice again. 6 months after the binding was created, Adrian received word that the abbot of Putna Monastery wanted to see him. The old man, 93 years old now, his hands gnarled with arthritis, his eyes still sharp with intelligence, sat in his study surrounded by ancient books and icons. "Dr. Petran," he said, "I wanted you to know that the Orthodox Church is establishing a new order, the new Brotherhood of Seven Seals. Young monks and scholars who will be trained to maintain the vigil, to study the threshold, to prepare humanity for what comes in 2124. That's good," Adrian said. "We'll need institutional support to maintain this long term." "We will also need your research," the abbot continued. "Everything you've documented, the manuscripts you translated, the observations you've made. The church is creating an archive, a secret one, accessible only to the new Brotherhood. Your work will form the foundation." Adrian nodded. "I'll provide everything. But there's something I need to know. The Watchkeepers, the 7 priests who died 3 months ago. Was that really coincidence, or was something..." He couldn't quite articulate the thought. The abbot's expression grew grave. "I've wondered that myself. 7 deaths in 7 days, just as the seal was weakening. As if something had orchestrated it. As if the Watcher itself, after 677 years of proximity to the Brotherhood's souls, had learned enough about our world to influence events, to create opportunities for its manifestation. That's terrifying. Yes, it means the Watcher is not passive. It watches, yes, but it also learns, plans, waits for the right moment. We must be more careful than the original Brotherhood, more vigilant, because we face an entity that has had centuries to study us, to understand our methods, to prepare for the next cycle. Adrian left Putner feeling the weight of that knowledge. They weren't just fighting against cosmic cycles and dimensional barriers. They were in a kind of slow-motion chess match with something that experienced time differently, that could wait centuries for the right move, that learned from every encounter. 1 year after opening the vault, I sat across from Adrian in that interview room as he finished his story. The photograph of the Watcher lay between us on the table. "The seal holds," he said, "for now. The patient count has dropped to nearly 0. The frescoes have stopped changing. The manifestation has been contained. But 7 people exist in the threshold space, neither alive nor dead, holding that boundary closed. And they'll remain there for years, decades, however long they can endure it." "And in 2124? I asked. "That's the question, isn't it? We have 99 years to prepare, to develop the inoculation process Christina suggested, to help humanity evolve enough to handle the knowledge of the threshold without shattering. The new Brotherhood will work toward that goal, but..." He trailed off, staring at something past my shoulder. "But what?" "But I wonder if we're approaching this wrong. The Brotherhood assumed humanity needed to be protected from the threshold. We're assuming humanity needs to be gradually prepared for it. But what if there's a third option? What if the solution is to accept that some knowledge should remain hidden? That blessed ignorance is actually a blessing, not a curse. You're saying we should maintain the seals forever? Keep sacrificing people every few generations to hold the boundary closed?" "I'm saying I don't know. I opened a door that had been sealed for 677 years, and 7 people paid the price for my curiosity. Maybe some doors are meant to stay closed. Maybe some truths are too terrible to bear, and the real wisdom is accepting our limitations rather than trying to transcend them." He stood to leave, gathering his papers, preparing to return to his lonely vigil. As he reached the door, he paused, looking back at me. "There's one more thing you should know," he said. "After the binding was complete, I saw it once, just once, not clearly, in my peripheral vision, in the corner of my awareness. The Watcher standing in a doorway, existing between dimensions. Every instinct screamed to turn, to look fully, to finally see clearly what I'd been researching for months." "What did you do?" I closed my eyes and walked away. Because Elena was right. Some knowledge destroys you just by knowing it. Some truths are too heavy to carry. And I'd already destroyed enough lives with my need to know. I didn't need to destroy my own as well. "Are you saying it's here now?" Adrian's expression was unreadable. "I'm saying it's everywhere. In every threshold, every boundary, every moment of transition. We just agreed, collectively, to never look directly at it, to preserve our comfortable ignorance of mortality, of the mechanism that maintains the boundary between life and death. The seal holds because 7 people are looking at it so the rest of us don't have to." He left, and I sat alone with the photograph and my recorder and the growing awareness that I'd just been told something I wasn't ready to know. I felt the urge to check the corners of the room, to verify that the shadows were just shadows, to confirm that nothing stood at the threshold of the door, patient and eternal, watching with interest as I struggled with knowledge I couldn't unknow. I didn't look. Some doors should stay closed. Some truths are too heavy to bear. And in the Carpathian Mountains, at the Monastery of Seven Seals, 7 souls maintained their impossible vigil. Eleanor and Father Nikolai, and 5 others, existing between life and death, holding closed the door that should never have been opened, until 2124, until the stars forget their numbers, until humanity evolves enough to handle the knowledge, or learns the wisdom to live without it. The Brotherhood of Seven Seals is dead. Long live the Brotherhood of Seven Seals. The watching never ends. And in the space between moments, In the threshold that exists at every boundary, the Watcher observes, patient as mountains, eternal as entropy, waiting for the next cycle, the next manifestation, the next time humanity will face the choice between comfortable ignorance and catastrophic awareness. It has waited before. It will wait again. It has all the time in the world. We don't.